Hello, welcome to the Peruvian Times. I'm Barbara Fraser. We're talking today with Dr. Lonnie Thompson. Dr. Thompson is one of the world's leading paleoclimatologists. He's a professor at Ohio State University in the United States, and he heads the ice core research area at the Byrd Polar Research Center at Ohio State University. He's a winner of the Tyler Prize for Environmental Achievement, the world's most prestigious environmental science award, and he has received the National Medal of Science in the United States, which is that country's the highest honor that country can confer on a scientist. Dr. Thompson is also one of the world's foremost experts on glaciers, which are very much in the news right now because disappearing glaciers are the most visible sign of the changing climate in our world. When we think of glaciers, we tend to think of places like Antarctica or like Greenland, but glaciers are also found in the tropics, which is that belt around the middle of the planet between 30 degrees north latitude and 30 degrees south latitude, where Peru is located. In fact, 70% of the world's tropical glaciers are in Peru, and they've been disappearing. Dr. Thompson is with us today to talk about what he's been finding in the glaciers. He first came to Peru in the 1970s as a graduate student. He's been studying Peru's glaciers since then, as well as glaciers around the world. He's here to talk with us about what the glaciers are telling him and why we should care. Dr. Lonnie Thompson, welcome. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Barbara. Pleasure to be here.
So, you've been following the glaciers for 40 years. What's the story?
Well, I think the thing about what I do is I go out and I visit glaciers around the world, and I do it on a yearly basis. And I think if all of us had that opportunity, we would all be concerned about what we see, the rate at which the ice is being lost. Here in Peru, the Coricalis Glacier is now the longest studied glacier, tropical glacier, the retreat history. And back when I started, for the first 15 years, we're mapping this glacier. It's more to look at how tropical glaciers behave. And in those first 15 years, it was retreating at maybe 6 meters per year. And as we've come forward in time, the rate at which the ice is retreating has accelerated. And in the last 15 years, it's averaged over 60 meters per year, 10 times faster. And it's not just this one outlet glacier, it's the whole ice cap, the largest tropical ice cap on Earth, and plus the glaciers throughout the Cordillera Blanca, throughout Peru, are behaving in the same way.
Now, this glacier that you've been studying since you were a graduate student, the Calcaya ice cap, which is in the Vilcanota mountain range?
It is,
in
yes.
Cusco, near Sicuani, outside Sicuani, no?
Yes. And
the Coricalis Glacier, which is part of that. What did it look like when you first came here, when you first saw it, and what does it look like now?
Well, first of all, I must say back in 1974, access to the glacier was very difficult. You could only get within a 2-day journey, and then you had to take horses to get into the ice field. But it's a magnificent ice field. It sits right above the Amazon basin, stretches from horizon to horizon on a plateau. It's a pure ice cap. And we only now, after 35 years of working around in the tropics, know that this is the largest one on Earth. But it covered 56 square kilometers when I started working there. This year it covers 40 kilometers. So it's lost about 25% of its area since I was a graduate student. And the rate at which it's being lost is accelerating. And that's really what's of concern.
Why is that a concern?
If you're dependent on water in the rivers below, the glaciers are kind of like a bank account. They store the snow and they store it through time. And they've grown, the ice cap's been there for thousands of years. And so in the last 100 years, this glacier is retreating, and it's like taking money out of the bank account. In fact, there's been more water in the rivers than normal because you got regular precipitation plus the snow melt and the glacier melt. But as the ice field gets smaller, then there's a threshold that you pass where suddenly the water discharge in the rivers drop, especially in the dry season. What makes the tropics, I think, at risk, and particularly Peru, is it's a very distinct wet season, plenty of precipitation, plenty of water. And the dry season comes and you've got 3 or 4 months of no precipitation. And those glaciers regulate the water for free in those river valleys. But as they become smaller, then there's less and less water going to be available for hydroelectric power production, for irrigation, for municipal water supplies. So, yeah, the glaciers are, they're a wonderful part of our system, and they kind of keep things in balance. But as they become smaller, then people are going to be more and more at risk, particularly in the dry season.
What kinds of people live near the Corycus Glacier, and how is this affecting them?
These are Quechua Indian people, and they are mainly raise alpaca and llama. And they depend on alpaca moss, which has to be water fed. So they have put in these canal systems, irrigation, to capture the water right where it comes from the glaciers. And they bring it around the contours of the mountains, and they let it out down the slopes, and it waters the moss that feeds their alpaca. But as the glaciers retreat up higher and higher, they have to continuously dig these canals higher to capture the water. And then in the last few years, we've seen whole lakes that have formed over the last 20 years due to this retreat suddenly disappear. They'll be flowing in one valley, and suddenly as the glaciers retreat upslope, there's new drainage that will develop into another valley, and one valley will totally dry up. All the alpaca moss, you can't graze anything, it dies. And then the adjacent valley will suddenly have too much water and actually drown the alpaca moss in that valley. So they're already seeing the consequences of the loss of those glaciers.
Climate change is something cyclical, and that we've had ice ages and thawing and ice ages and thawing, and in fact the Earth is in a thawing. It's like we're coming out of the last ice age. And among the things that drive that are the tilt of the Earth, the angle of the sun, the orbit of the Earth, the elliptical orbit of the Earth. What makes you think that what's happening now is something other than the natural cycle, and that the world will just eventually go into another ice age because that's what it's always done?
Well, there are people who study Milankovitch cycles, and the fact is that we would have to go back 413,000 years to find a time similar to ours. And if you go back to that period, the interglacial then lasted 30,000 years, twice as long as a normal warm period. And so we would have been in an extended warm period anyway from the natural forcings. But on top of that, we have the human activity on the planet. 6.7 billion people consuming energy, releasing fossil fuel, CO2 into the atmosphere, methane, nitrous oxide, changing the composition of the atmosphere. And what really makes our time different is we've never had 6.7 billion people. Even with the natural variability in the past, if you have fewer numbers, you can migrate, people can go to new places, but we pretty much occupy this planet everywhere that is possible for people to live. So the question is, with these changes taking place, and the real, if you look at Milankovitch, those are slow forcings. Things change over time. People can adapt. But what we're seeing today is abrupt. It's very abrupt, very rapid change. And that's where societies have the hardest time making the adjustments they need to make. And that's what makes our time different.